So shameless plug for this book actually started, the provenance was a conversation about a direct-to-consumer test, an AMH test. And I know we'll be talking about that later on. But it also came about because people were searching online, friends of mine were searching online on social media largely for health information. And the other trigger was actually the overdiagnosis conference at the Royal College of GPs in Denmark. So you can possibly see where it's heading. Despite the title, it's far more balanced than the title is, but obviously you've got to give it a sensationalist title. For the book, I interviewed about 200 people, so influencers, content creators. John here was a real help, and you can see Claire in the audience as well, Claire Davenport. Academics, doctors, people who were searching for health information online, and also went to the literature. But inevitably, the literature is always a bit behind the marketing agencies when it comes to impact. And I started out basically with an open mind. I didn't know what I was going to find. I went on a journey, and each chapter there's a story. But ultimately, I concluded this is perhaps what happens when you put health on platforms that are geared towards entertainment and marketing and shopping. They're barely regulated advertising spaces. So for a long time, we've measured our bodily metrics. So you can see the Puritans there that kept ledgers, Benjamin Franklin. And at the end, there's the quantified self movement, 2007. The editors of Wired magazine set up a community really and community is an important word in this, community to track bodily metrics. And it was sort of geeky tech people, but that has massively changed with the widespread use of wearables and Apple Watches and rings and everything else. So we've always wanted to sort of measure ourselves and whether that's our weight, but that's dramatically changed. And money, as we know, has always shaped medicine, whether that is alcohol, food, tobacco, pharma, whatever, they've always shaped how we think about medicine. But these parameters have changed, and there's a whole new wave of players. And I think it's a new commercial determinant of health. We've heard of the digital determinants of health, but it's a new commercial determinant of health. And we have big tech platforms with their opaque algorithms, with lots of small industries that are on it, whether they're influencers, online pharmacies, direct-to-consumer testing, clinics. And everybody is involved in shaping our content. I think John used the word prosumer effect in the book, where people are not only consuming information, they're adding to content as well, with all different incentives behind it. And we just get, as John's just mentioned, we've got this rapid deployment of health tech startups, apps, diagnostics. They're all competing for authority. And these commercial engines have unprecedented access to our bodies. You hover over one picture or reel on Instagram or TikTok, and you get more and more of the same. And think about what that perhaps is doing to our biases. Why do people go there? And I would never judge anybody for turning to social media for their information, and I don't think that is right. But largely, people I spoke to, diagnostic odysseys, unexplained symptoms. There's always somebody that can explain your symptom on social media, even if your GP can't. The idea that medical gaslighting, so at points during the book, the term medical gaslighting was trending, as are doctors are dickheads. So I think that's sort of, whether we agree or not with that, and that particularly came up in women's health. And then 15-minute consultations, that's possibly charitable, but we can't compete with the 24/7 validation, connection, assumed empathy provided by the online communities. And one OBG and one obstetrician gynecologist at Duke University in North Carolina said to me, when she has a young patient coming to her for contraceptive advice, she's competing 20-minute slot with 4 hours a day on TikTok, where people have empathy and influencers actively use this empathy. It's called parasocial relationships, and they make you feel seen and heard. You might have seen all the sort of tropes, women with hairbands on, putting on their makeup while they talk to you, messy kitchens, people sitting behind the steering wheel of a car, not driving necessarily, talking to you. It's all this idea to build up this connection. And obviously they only show you what they want us to see, and I think less than 50%, some studies suggested less than 50% declare any conflicts of interest. So, and then there's a new term, I'm writing about the BMJ, for the BMJ about this, is trans-parasocial relationships. So this is when influencers drop into the direct messages, and from a marketing perspective, that's a really important interaction, but it's also incredibly, well, it's impossible to regulate. So we've got this whole, so 20th century, we've got this whole new parallel system of people offering advice, and where there's a gap in a market, commercial players jump into it. There's always someone there to reassure. And one of the challenges is, and I think the biggest problem I have, is when doctors use this parasocial relationship but then lean into authority bias. They sort of play the insider outsider. I was part of the health system. I'm going to step out and tell you what's going wrong, and I'm going to sell you my snake oil, perhaps. And people are having to navigate their health through this system. Again, it's the wellness industrial complex, if you like, and John touched on it. What is wellness and what is health? And again, you know, I remain open-minded about some of this because there's an absence of evidence for benefits versus harms for a lot of the interventions. But the idea with tech, in many ways, is it was actually Carl Hennigan that said it to me. It's almost, you know, you go out quickly and you wait to see if it doesn't work. It's the opposite of the null hypothesis. You assume the alternative hypothesis. It's going to work until proven otherwise, as opposed to, we don't think this is going to work. Let's gather the evidence. And so you've got all this mashup online, and someone sort of called it the new snake oil. Actually, that will be someone probably known to a lot of you, Karsten in Copenhagen. And these are incredibly difficult to regulate. And as we said, it's opaque algorithms. And in some ways, and again, I don't know the impact of this. And it was Patrick Chinnery, who's the exec chair of the MRC, asked me, so what's the impact of all this on our health and our perceptions and on the NHS? And we don't know. It's really hard to study for lots of different reasons. And get back to it again, and a lot of this is built on the idea that the more biological parameters we measure, the better. And you heard that time and time again. Well, why wouldn't I want to know what's going on in my body? And the obvious question is, why? And when the book came out, actually, I was contacted by someone that wanted to develop a menopause symptom tracker because there's a big gap in the female and women's health space. And I asked why. So there's a lot of people sort of stepping into the space to offer solutions, but they don't necessarily know the impact of what they're developing. And so, you know, wearables are now consumer devices, optimization, you know, Stephen Bartlett, you've got to sweat the small stuff in your health and measure absolutely everything. Again, it comes back to the question, why? What is the impact? And that might be heart rate variability, glucose spikes. And then there's this idea that as tech comes in, it's the mechanistic bias. You know, a lot of the Silicon Valley step in and they think, you know, bodies are just complex computers, and we know things are not that straightforward. So I've called it the commodified self. We have the quantified self, and commodified self, if we can measure it, we can sell against it. And I guess the meme would be, tell someone they're broken and we're going to offer you the protocol to fix it. And again, you know, I'm sounding skeptical. I guess that is my role as an investigative journalist to shine a spotlight. But some of this might be good. We don't know. I think it's probably a mixture of Annika said at the beginning, good and bad. You know, it's great that people are taking control of their health, but in what way and what difference is it going to make, benefits versus harms again? And again, the issue is, again, when we're talking about testing, is the reframing of normality. So normal glucose are now toxic spikes, different perhaps if you have type 1, type 2 diabetes, you use insulin, you need insulin, you have a continuous glucose glucose monitor. Low T, we know that is, that's been around for a long time. But again, re-emergence with the podcast bros, Joe Rogan, saying people that need to go on testosterone. And again, it's sort of expanding this, healthy people perhaps into life conditions where there's something you can sell, you can measure and you can sell. And again, there's this continuous feedback loop. So everyday discomfort, you go online, up comes your algorithm. The number of people that I spoke to said, oh, I didn't realise I had this condition until I went onto Instagram or TikTok. And there's this idea that the algorithms know you better than you know yourself. And they pick up on, and as one health psychologist said, they perhaps know your neuroses better than you do, perhaps slightly pejoratively. And then a lot of this is being monetised. And again, it all sort of feeds back in together. And hyper-awareness, again, and there's debate about whether constantly monitoring how you feel, is that a good or a bad thing in the sort of, amongst health psychologists. So again, you know, it's our traumas, our symptoms, all monetized. So if you look at the ADHD world, dopamine, everything, ADHD is just about dopamine, and people are selling T-shirts against it. There's obviously how to hack your hormones, and complex conditions are flatlined into memes. So we've got this thing about hormones and neurotransmitters, you know, and serotonin chasing, oxytocin chasing, dopamine chasing. Measure it, sell against it. And again, consumer tests are a way to sell other interventions. So you might sell a test, but then you sell a subscription package. There's lots of subscription packages available in the UK. You have your testosterone test, and you get subscription to monthly testosterone. And again, open-minded, is this a good or a bad thing? It's happening. Is it a good or a bad thing? And then the big one chapter I look at a lot is the full body MRI, and that has taken on, that is gold dust when it comes to marketing. So you use celebrities, so the Kardashians, we feature quite a lot in the book, I have to say, and you get them to have full body MRIs. They put it on their feeds, tens of millions of followers. And screening saves lives, and it's all reducible to means. And we know things are not that straightforward with, you know, the clinical diagnostic odysseys, clinical cascade, and incident loads, false positive, false negatives. And I tried to talk about some of this in the book. It's quite hard to explain. It makes sense. Catch it early. It helps. Why not get a full body MRI? And this has all been sort of reduced into quick sound bites on social media. And then you've got the issue of discount codes. So I've got one, here's my discount code, you go get one too. And you speak to influencers like, well, it helped me, why wouldn't I offer a discount code to help somebody else? And then, so private, get a bit political, it's privatised profit, public bad. And where does this end up? Does it end up in the GP practice? What happens when comes to a GP consultation? This was what Patrick Chinnery kept asking me, what's the impact on the NHS of all this rise? And you can't help but think, again, this is a book, it's a journey, but you can't help but think it's nudging clinical expectations and perceptions. This is what I can get online. This is what the NHS can offer me. And I heard that time and time and time again. And it's not neutral. It's very much, the algorithms are very much geared towards commercial information. If it's an advert, labelled an advert, it gets deprioritised by the algorithms, build up a relationship with an influencer, who, as I said, don't declare their conflicts of interest necessarily, it gets nudged up. And the piece I'm looking at for the BMJ is the adoption of direct-to-consumer advertising of prescription drugs in this country. The Advertising Standards Authority knows a problem. But what is the impact of that? In many ways, the best evidence we've got about the impact of consumer marketing comes from the United States with direct-to-consumer advertising prescription drugs, but that is traditional media, it's TV and print, not this new media with the parasocial and trans-parasocial relationships. And there we go, that is, so I sort of called this commodified self, and we don't know the impact. It may be good, it may be bad, I remain to be convinced either way, but there you go, thank you.